This book, which I hold in my hand, there is only 2 copies of it, one in the hands of the Vatican, and the other, like I just said, in my hands. I've already given you the preface, so now I'll give you chapter 1. Mechanical proof, the Earth is not a globe. Chapter 1. The sum of evidence, termed facts, held for the spherical notion. Most people are entertaining a false notion that there exists a mass of knowledge and evidence purporting to support the theory that the Earth is a globe. To obliterate such a misconception and show the cold real facts, I quote as a sample of citation those big things called facts which are held to support this notion. Many facts are known from which it is inferred that the Earth is globular, such as the appearance of the top of a lighthouse earlier than its base to a ship approaching the shore, the dip of the sea horizon, the elevation of the pole star as we travel north, and its depression as we travel south. The analogy of the other planets, which seem to be globular when viewed through a glass, and the circular form of the Earth's shadow, as observed in the lunar eclipse, to these must be added the well-known circumstance that travellers going ever eastward pass entirely around the Earth and return to the point of starting. From these facts it is concluded that the Earth is globular, that it is to say like a globe, but whether spherical, spheroidal, or ellipsoidal, there is thus far no evidence. Quoted from Precise Surveying and Geodesy by Mansfield Merriman, Professor of Civil Engineering in Lair University, pages 137 to 8. All can be found in every text dealing in astronomy, geodesy, cosmogony, etc. The attention of the reader is directed to the word fact. The top of the lighthouse seen before its base is not a fact, it is an appearance. Just because all cats appear black at night does not make it a fact that a white cat is black. The above claim of fact is therefore an appearance, and this sifts down to the theoretical assumptive state. It will be observed that the term inference is similarly not compatible with the word fact. This system of modern astronomy has become so cocksure of its theories that a guess and an assumption are ranked synonymous with to fact. This is not a play on words. It is willful deception or ignorance on the part of astronomy. The writer will give a prize of 6 toothpicks and 2 matches to anyone who can pick from the above quotation or from any other quotation or from the oral lips of a living astronomer or any other scholar, any proof, any real tangible fact which can be recognized as a fact and not as a theory, an appearance, or as simple mind stuff. It is evident from the quotation above that there exists a total lack of conviction. Summed up, all these so-called facts, what do they amount to? Nothing. What little common sense might be tenable in the appearance of things is totally outranked by the nonsense the deeper one delves into the theoretical intricacies. We cite in our book a real mechanical fact, a fact which is not replete with ambiguity, nor with a desire to deceive. Its simplicity can be apprehended by a child of immature years as well as by the layman. Colonel Charles A. Lindbergh, intrepid birdman who flew over Neptune's boundless reaches, returns home with all the world humbly bowed at his feet. And why? Simply because he did that which no other in our day had the perspicacity to do. It is unquestionably true that many another thought of the possibilities and realized the scientific and commercial value attached to the achievement, but thinking and doing belong to 2 different orders. The first, thinking, leads nowhere, while the other, doing and acting, has energy and motion. The glory and renown of the first to do will distinguish Colonel Lindbergh as a great and immortal figure throughout all history. In that first interval, thousands of years will pass fleetingly by, yet his name and achievement will be an undying mark for many future centuries. It will be recited daily in the schools of posterity. Analogous to Lindbergh's achievement, though, ever fresh in our minds, we still read with awe and wonder of the darling and triumph of Christopher Columbus, who through now 400 years later still grips our affections with his prowess and active foresight. He, a lone individual, took the world by the ears, telling them without equivocation that they were wrong and he was right, and as the case turned out, none other was right but he. Yet in those same accounts we read of those who with brazen effrontery contemptuously essayed to ridicule and deter him in his efforts to broaden the scope of his field of science. We also read of those who actually did bestow upon him the helping hand. The latter are in our day and estimation the pre-eminents, and we elevate them upon our highest pedestals in our halls of fame. But the opposers and obscurantists, and unfortunately also those who bear their names, must be stigmatized throughout all eternity. Just as Columbus had those who rewarded him only with the most pitiful smiles, so Colonel Lindbergh, even in our aggrandized age, might be said to have been similarly blessed. These sympathetic ones who would have deemed it an act of charity to commit the intrepid eagle to the institution of mercy are, with their genealogical progeny, destined to go down into history with this stigma attached to them. As concerns those who had the perspicacity and foresight, who foresaw that history must repeat, and that so-called fool, as in former times, would again emerge as the real enlightened ones, those who foresaw these inevitable recurring events will stand out as the preeminence of the future ages. Chief in rank amongst those who gave the colonel the helping hand, and who stand out as the greatest innovators in the flying fraternity, are the Wright brothers. Without their perspicacity and their endowment to science, perhaps and indeed there would have been no achievement for Colonel Lindbergh, no attribute for us to marvel at, no glory and renown for the United States, and finally, and most important, no historical record for the 20th century. But while thinking of the achievements, let us not fail to refresh our recollections with the manner in which these brothers were early viewed. They were hooted, howled at, jeered, jibed, ridiculed, and what not. But throughout this marvellous expression of ridicule, they clung to their posts, displaying that pugnacious do-or-die stamp marked upon their faces. The press and public gave them as little encouragement as was obscurely possible. Yet this same group of press editors now cannot speak over praise in their behalf. From this exposition it is quite clear that those who are at first jeered and ridiculed, who are generally slated for the Nut College, later become our brightest luminaries. It is not merely occasionally that this occurs, but invariably always. The turnabout face is the same. Lindbergh was at first nicknamed the Flying Fool, but after success crowned his efforts, his fatuous and umbilic epithet was transformed into a more endearing and more affectionate title. That which is known to be true is Lindbergh's case, and in the Wright brothers is likewise true in all cases, ancient as well as modern, and in pure science as well as in the applied field. The time, the age, the man, the conditions, none of these changed that first law. Take the case of Thomas Edison and his incandescent lamp, Alexander Graham Bell and the telegraph and telephone, and in pure science Dr. Albert Einstein's theory of relativity. They each in turn primarily succumbed to the hue and cry of being incurable aberrants. Yet as has since been proven, a few saw the light of the lamp and heard the words over the wire, which has therefore affirmed that these former fatuous ones were actually the enlightened ones. They were of strong minds, while others, by their boisterous expressions, are not endowed with the injunction that silence is golden, were pronouncedly the weak minds, the minds which were unable to perceive or reason. Now it is not usually the ordinary mind which assumes this Philistinic attitude. The great public of course follow, but only as appears, nor is it the press and its news mongers who bring on the early ridicule. In Mr. Edison's case, it was indeed the greatest electrical authorities on both continents who paved the way for the press and public. They were the first and the worst to ridicule. The press and public then tagged after in their innocent bo-peep way. Mr. Edison even yet takes keen delight in reviewing some of the absurdities which were interjected to hinder his progressive experiments. Some of those electrical authorities question how it could be possible for a man without an electrical training to perfect anything. Yet, as has proven the case, wizards and precocious-minded train themselves, and this more proficiently than could a technical culture. Similar predisposed attacks were directed at the inventor of the telephone. People wanted to know how he was going to send words through wooden poles. Would he dissolve them first in a liquid and then let them sleep through the sap and come out in fact, as well as other known ridiculous queries? The press and public are ordinarily excusable, but in science the men who are supposed to have the training, if not faculty, are certainly not to be overlooked. In scientific matters everything is true until disproven. That of course means that Professor Einstein's theory of relativity should have been scientifically put into the scholastic mill, ground down through the aid of many minds, and the grist would be the product. But it, good or bad, right or wrong, did scientists apply this formula? Absolutely not. They sealed their ears, closed their eyes, hardened their minds, and gave out to the press and its reading offspring the idea that Einstein was top-heavy. Without aware of the principle of the theory, they implied they knew all about it, and more, but after they had been forced to unbend themselves, forced to unseal their bottled and obscurantistic minds, they then right about face and branded the uninformed as the errant ones. As may be seen, therefore, the obscurantistic state of mental aberration is not a fault solely of the less informed, but also, and more often, a lapse of the better informed. The psychology of mind, therefore, is not improved, whether aloft or nether, high or low. Of course, the law of expectancy looks forward to a pronounced improvement in higher realms, yet the law is more often the reverse than the true. The average individual, as well as the scholar, has no way of informing himself with the state of mind in the scientific realms, because if such had been the case, he would have been the authority and dominating obscurantist. The scientist without this appendage to his name is primarily human. Being human, he deports himself just as do humans, which means, in brevity, that in science there are all kinds and many manner of humans, which means in the second instance that they are in science just as they are in all walks of life, good, bad, and indifferent, etc. What is true of him in the lowly environs is less true of him in the higher. The one has a special training in but one line, which is true of the lower school of mechanics. Each then is no better, no higher advanced mentally than the special training which he has acquired. A physicist, an electrical engineer, a chemist, and others are no better endowed psychologically, religiously, epistemologically, sociologically, or civilly than the mechanic wedded to his machine. Laboratory methods have utterly failed in applied mechanics and undertakings. They have their value, but the practical man, the self-made manufacturer, he is aware that only through the real start from the bottom pragmatics is this code of training of any material value. Thus the mind state is not improved whether one be accredited the highest authority in his particular field of research. That is the manner in which we must view scientists and their predisposed attitudes as displayed towards or against advancement and education. Having mentioned the aeroplane with Colonel Lindbergh, it chances to be a part of the topic through the following intelligence in no ways bears upon the issue. The bit of history is given only as it may aid in a better understanding of the brevities which follow. Contrary to historical as well as present-day opinion, the flying machine is not a modern accomplishment. From the records at command, it is more than evident that the flying machine was known far back into the ages, that it was employed at the former time to fly over the North and South Poles, is of course information and quite outstanding value, as some of this history is a bit profound due to being fragmentary, will therefore not be introduced. To clarify, it would require too much space and detail. Still, within recent times we have records which may be easily scanned. One of these instances of recent times in which the flying machine was known relates to Leonardo da Vinci, the eminent painter, sculptor, architect, engineer, and whatnot. 300 years ago, when at least the flying machine already had been formulated into a practical machine that flew. Its inventor, though, later destroyed the machine for fear that it would be employed in warfare to slay men. The Northmen similarly have left extant startling statements which unquestionably refers to the airship or flying machine. These inferences and statements are to be found in the Norse-manic accounts relating to their discovery of America. This evidence may later pave the way for investigations along this and other lines which may have formerly never been imagined possible. Let us also now briefly review the psychology of the ages and glean from the review a far clearer understanding of ourselves and of this age we live in. This will aid in discovering why we imagine why we are crowning age of all ages. It will similarly aid us in understanding history, as well as the startling facts which will be later herein unfolded. We can first of all set ourselves down in a plastic poise and erase from our minds the false impression that we have advanced any in our time. If any advancement whatsoever is apparent, it was willed to us through the bequests of our immediate ancestors. The radio, as one idea of advancement, is the product of Edison's incandescent lamp, who is now old enough to be classed as an ancestor. His lamp in turn similarly rests upon a bit of previous came-down knowledge, and so on. There is unquestionably not a grain of evidence which denotes progress. It is quite true that implications and appearance so state, but implication is not synonymous to denotation, and is therefore foreign to fact. The most which we can claim for ourselves is to acknowledge that we have blinded ourselves with the over-pretentiousness, which of course means that we have been cheating ourselves. We cheat ourselves by implying that we have advanced, which implication conceals the true facts of life as they would otherwise normally be seen. By this mental enshrouding, we abort progress and advancement rather than aiding it. Ego and hedonistic pedantry have been poisonous, lethal in deterring man and progress ever since man has had the breath of life pumped or breathed into him. Such pedantry, insidiously ingrained, has been an active agent in deterring progress and advancement in former ages, which should be big enough lesson to caution us in our day. This state of pedantry obstructs one's vision of life. A mind that is blinded or excited cannot think or visualize coolly and rationally, can it? Similarly, a mind enshrouded with its own importance cannot perceive the important things around it, because such a mind reduces them to unimportant things, according to its way of thinking. At what stage in man's nascent life is he the most plastic and susceptible to learning? There could be no dispute upon this primary point, can there? It is in the days of his youth and his freedom from over-pretentiousness. It is true that the child feels he does not need disciplinary education, because he is not as yet capable of realizing its intrinsic value, but maturity has experienced and tasted, and so can prepare and caution its youthful protege. Maturity, though, at times is misleading. A rustic mountaineer without education, standing 6 feet tall and matured, has of course only a child mind to guide him, while his stature and age belie his childlike ignorance, falsely implying his apparent superiority over the child. This mind, though transplanted into an immature and emaciated child mind, would immediately and clearly determine its status. The same is analogously true of many matured minds, though they be far removed from prosaic environs. They are the large town environed rustics. Such minds are overstuffed with their importance, nearly implying and more often smatting, and though they had contributed anything to advancement. When a mind is sealed and so overstuffed with its own importance, it is utterly impossible to dig one's way into it. It is the imperious bottled and sealed. But the mind which is free, open, receptive, and plastic, it is not difficult for the mind to perceive truth, common sense, and to weigh it judiciously. It follows as a consequence that every age as a whole, and in turn, had this overstuffed and over-pretentious fixed mental failing. Had they, on the other hand, been open and plastic, those more remote ages certainly could have paved the way for our better understanding of life on earth, which means a better understanding of science. Still, pedantry, then as now, stifled progress, so that only recently has there been progress and revivation. It should be understood in the words progress, advancement, etc., that these terms are employed as a matter of convenience, and not in a strict sense. Man has been reviving past scientific things, not conceiving them, as too many, even scientists, have been falsely led to believe. Revivation is the only accurate term, but for the present, and due to its inharmonious tone, due to lack of appreciating the facts as yet, we will still continue using the known euphonics. It should be borne in mind also that such revivations were bequeathed us by our immediate forebears, fathers and grandfathers, we of this age not having contributed other than slight improvements, while even these improvements were formerly known and highly perfected. It should be known also, in view of the state of evidence, that always every age viewed each previous one as an ancient one, which can only mean that the next generation or age will view our now still existing age as being then equally as ancient. This will be the assumption of the next age, regardless whether they contribute a thing to science or to society or not. As a matter of fact, they can even degenerate and believe, in their own way, that they are advancing. The clue to the history of the aeroplane above demonstrates one particular instance wherein we in our age have not advanced, though we have revived. Revivation, of course, is advancement, but only in a special sense, not in the way we imply advancement and progress. From this it follows that the ancient adage is true, that there is nothing new under the sun. The old adage speaks volumes. So it may be seen that we have merely been implying advancement as an attribute of our age, when in fact, if one but looks about, we have really drifted lower and lower in the scale. From this it may then be seen that the next generation can go even lower and lower, yet all the time they can be pedantly implying they are advancing, based simply upon the idea that they are doing things differently than we did them. We believe based upon a lopsided mind, as they can likewise believe, which of course means that they will be the living age which speaks its own mind, so its errors cannot be argued against the mind making them. Just as we can see the logic of our being later classed as old-fashioned and ancient, so we must also see the logic which informs us that we have made no progress, but that it is mere revivation. It is true, without question, that we are no longer the farmers, the tillers of the soil of yesteryear. We have changed or differentiated into the gregarious flock and large town order of environmentalists. In large towns and municipalities we cannot do our own thinking, but down upon the farm, out in the open, close to nature, thinking is quite possible. That indeed solves the question and riddle why men and women take such keen enjoyment away from the humdrum of city life. They crave to be free, to think for themselves, to roam about unhampered by signs here and there inhibiting their natural carefree natures. That's why we dote on silence, so that we are free to commune and think for ourselves, not for some sensationalist to do it for us. The life of the rustic, for that reason, appeals as much to the child as to the grown person. Both want to fish and hunt, enjoy the rich odour of new mown hay, and breathe the invigorating air, which has not been contaminated by our herding together, which all kinds of pathological diseases being breathed and impelled into our food and drinking supplies. Besides, any one can think up many blessings found in a rural life, not found in a gas-congested city life. It is thus not hard to witness that we have introduced considerable change into our mode of living. But whereas we have differentiated considerably, we need not imply this as an improvement nor an advancement. We are today living upon tin can, cold storage, and synthetic foodstuffs, aluminium, the most scientific and what we believe to be the utmost of sanitary utensils, granulates and gets into our foodstuff if left in this container for any length of time. And this, of course, contributes to the gigantic toll of cancerous lesions, which are steadily gaining beyond all our medical and surgical skill and knowledge. That, then, evidenced the change which is now being experienced. We've deprived ourselves of fresh country products, fresh vegetables, direct from the virgin soil, pure and aromatic, with its natural dew, fresh butter, direct from the churn, free of preservatives, septics and colouring matter, fresh milk, warm and creamy from the cow, fresh eggs, direct from the hennery, while in their stead we have substituted unnatural things, the radio, the dance hall, the theatre, etc. Of course, we cannot condemn the will of things, but it should be observed that change does not necessarily imply it to be an improvement, much less an achievement. Once we come to this point of view, then, any environment outlined for us will be more highly appreciated, even the grooved one we are now in. But refusing to note the real state of things, we of course are merely cheating ourselves and our so-called scientific age. It is unquestionably true that we have apparently overcome famines and droughts due perhaps to our cold storage facilities, yet it is similarly true that even savages fill up their larders for such recurring conditions, and similarly, not yet having been found necessary, it is questionable whether our cold storage products would last even months, not to mention years. Such long sieges have not been experienced by us, nature having been very kind during the past few hundred years. By putting two and two together, the advantages and the disadvantage due to our present altered form of environment, the final tone will prove that it does not spell improvement, and consequently cannot spell advancement and progress. This is the one and only point under consideration. It is not a matter of ordinary reform tactics, but a matter of scientific investigation and assimilation to see if we are steering our course straight. From the average individual and his idea of advancement, it is a very slight step to the scientific realm. The average human, being a human, thinks along human lines, while his counterpart of mind and its consequences are to be found in the scientific circles. What the human does in his lowly environ, due to many minds, the many minds in the scientific circles, being also variable, duplicates the lowly element. The scientific array of minds, for that reason, has its composition of good, bad, and indifferent. What the scientists believe, they believe with a vengeance. Their minds cannot be changed, even with the most powerful testimony and evidence. No amount of common sense can make them budge an inch from their traditional views, their taught impressions. They are as solidly grooved and through-moulded in a matrix, while they show the same marks of superstitious inclination manifested in every other walk of life. Such, though, are only the drones which will be mentioned later. In the lower minds, for instance, as example, the man born a Democrat invariably dies a Democrat. Had destiny decreed that he had been born next door, a Republican, he would have fought for and championed this party just as he now does the opposite side. If born a Catholic, all other religions are absolutely false. If born next door to a Protestant of any sect, he would have denounced Catholicism and other sects with the same gusto which he would born otherwise. Shintoists, Mohammedists, Buddhists, totem worshippers, fetish adherents, each believes himself and therefore his religion, the only true and outstanding one. No attempt is made to ascertain the why and whereof. A theologian taught in the theology invariably knows little else, while an atheist carries on with his ingraining as his stock in trade. A scientist engrooved for any particular branch of learning becomes odorantly stereotyped in that groove, because that is all that he knows anything about. He therefore rates no higher as a mentalist or a thinker than is the poor boob who professes he knows it all. Each in their respective sphere actually deter further advancement, as will later be seen. This then states the mind of man, in his various environs, being an attempt to demonstrate this fact and evidence in a clear-cut manner, and not as a bit of liturgy. What one is born, that he invariably dies. What a man is taught or is not taught, that is what he remains, till death do us part. These facts of comparison can be proven, and what can be proven must be facts. Fact, therefore, is what we seek, and not mere idle implications and conjecture. For every word which has ever been uttered, now or at other times, each word had its value. The word or words may not be apprehended in the understandable way, may not be delivered in a comprehensible manner, but if understood as delivered, it has its value. Value, though, by itself stands for the very least of nothing. There is no value to money or currency, except the value we set upon it. The cowrie shells of African tribes have value to them, but not to us, while our medium of exchange has value to us, but not to them. All that is said in this account for that reason has an object and value. Understanding requires education, natural or acquired. Misunderstandings needs no education, needs not even common sense. Anyone can misunderstand, and he needs not go far to impress this fact upon anyone. It is therefore hoped that this precursory introduction of the subject under issue will pave the way for better understanding. It will thus make the greater evidence to follow more liberally viewed and better apprehended as a direct consequence of the powers of grasping. It is proposed to offer for consideration a decidedly new discovery which will completely revolutionize all our ideas as regards the earth and the heavens. In fact, all present ideas in astronomy. It is a big issue, and in view of its startling magnitude and importance, we must have the mind prepared in advance so that the knowledge which is now stored up in concept can be added to the intelligence which follows. We must resort to all the reserves at our command to appreciate the common sense of the subject under discussion, as well as the important part it plays in our lives, or that part of our lives which has not as yet been wantonly neglected or falsely dissipated. But before we can delve into the heart of the subject, certain general principles must necessarily be stated at the very outset. This leads to clarity and consumes very little extra time to state anything big in science, even though it is already known to many, as instance Einstein's theory must first undergo the brief explanations essential to the final assimilation. In our elementary school days, we began our career by taking up the alphabetical characters first, followed by grammar, composition, and rhetoric. The start was made symbolically. The letter A was symbolically related to a wedge, which then referred to an angle. The character C spelled cat, which was shown to represent the C curved tail of the cat. The Egyptians and other races employed pictures to represent letters and words. We follow that same method today, only of greater simplicity. Just as it's true relative to the alphabet and elementary education, so it is true that we began by adding and subtracting, multiplying and dividing. Later we went into algebra, geometry, and trigonometry. It would have been utterly impossible to begin at the top, then subsequently finish up by taking the elementaries last. These are the steps we shall pursue. The subject will be found interesting only to the sum of all the facts which can be grasped. If it has held you thus long, it will grip your fancy more and more as we go along. The issue under discussion, as stated, attempts to disprove the erroneous inference that the earth is a convex globe, as at present entertained. The ultimate proof does not rely upon preposition, it follows as a consequence, but upon the factful proposition that it is absolutely not a convex earth. But in speaking of astronomy, cosmography, geography, history, etc., it may lead one to imagine that the subject is deep. Such is far from the truth of the case. There is really nothing profound in science. It appears so to the uninformed, but if one has a bit of patience, he can very easily understand all that is involved in a common-sense scientific discussion. But there is an added zest implanted in the present issue, which should completely remove the shroud which implies it to be profound. This is so for a certain vital reason, which the effect is that it demands merely that one use only the common sense which the gifty genius. From this it may be seen that even a child can understand the astronomical premises which will be herein stated. In the present work it makes no difference whether one be a scientist or not. Science, first of all, and in all things, must await the pleasure of the public. Public opinion fundamentally governs science, whether the public or whether science is aware of it or not. Therefore, common sense, the sum total of natural endowment, is all that is required to get a clear comprehension of the evidence herein disclosed. The Maker has thus bestowed upon one and all the same sum total of faculty and its appreciation of common sense. And the Maker, having similarly created nature along with the mind, which must solve the natural problems, it is quite clear that he made the one to conform to the other, provided of course we have not been disillusioned with a lopsided concept due to man's introducing things foreign to nature, or interpreting nature falsely. For that reason, one may be a banker, a broker, or even a candlestick maker, and he will be equally as well fortified to weigh the evidence as the astronomer. The reason for this should by now be quite clear. The issue under discussion claims that all astronomy is wrong. Well, if all astronomy is wrong and faulty, the present lengthy exposition shows that the modern astronomer, grooved in a false teaching, can hardly act as an authority in this matter, the vitals being as completely foreign to him as to any other, but he only a common hod carrier. The common sense which must dominate should be seen at a glance from this statement. That will be the method pursued throughout the entire discourse. Thus, by holding tight to the leading hand and beginning with the first principles, gradually going deeper and deeper, it will then be understood why the earth cannot be a globe, as astronomers are wont to hold. But if one reads and runs, he should only expect to get out what he puts into it. Even after having essayed to clarify this account thus far, it may be that a few who will read will feel predisposed against it by virtue of the mere statement made, that the earth is not a globe, in the present sense. Thus, to ward off and anticipate this state of mind, let me likewise say, it is not flat. Not being a convex globe, and not flat, what is its shape? That we shall now soon be aware of. But from the foregoing, it is quite clear that the astronomer cannot well inject his astronomical ideas or teachings, can he? He cannot introduce claims that he has certain proofs in the stars and in the skies, can he? He certainly cannot do that, because we are not dealing with the sun, sky, stars, but with the earth. Therefore, if you care to ask any astronomer what is his stellar yardstick, he will tell you that it is the earth. If the earth is the initial unit for measuring stars in the sky, and this initial unit is now found faulty, then common sense must tell us that the astronomer must begin over again, just like you or I. No man having touched the stars with his hands, of course, they may or may not be billions of miles away. The most facts anyone needs, though, is to know that the stars cannot be ever touched, not even if one had an arm 240,000 miles long. Could he even touch Earth's nearest satellite, the moon? The highest altitudes ever attained by man is a mere 8 miles, only as far as the person might easily walk in 2 hours' time. From this bit of information we may be determined orally by interrogating any astronomer, or can be gleaned from astronomical textbooks which are abundantly diffused in our public libraries. It is readily adducent that common sense alone can govern the situation from this point onwards. My position is this: if the facts introduced into this account are true, then astronomy is proven faulty. My facts must deal with the primary unit of measurement now employed in astronomy. If, then, fact is the basis of truth, or if truth is fact, then any one can see the truth and facts when set alongside the present astronomical claims of fact. If, though, my premises produce no facts, and the modern astronomer's claims do hold them, then my case is lost. Therefore I must produce the facts in a common sense manner, or else, provided others fail to apprehend them, then I am due to defeat. That outlines my position, and upon that solid common sense foundation I stand or fall, as the case may be. This means, therefore, that my statements must be understood. Consequently, notwithstanding that the unit Earth is our primary basis, still we must know the history of the idea which conceived the Earth as a globe. This history will be stated very briefly. There are two histories to be considered, the one being the history of this idea as it is now entertained in our scientific and educational circles, and a second history as it actually is in fact. The first part of this historical outline will treat upon the scientific history as held by modern scientists. The terms we and scientists will be employed only as a matter of convenience, without committing the writer to them. The scientific history of the present day, as concerns the idea of the Earth as a globe, is indeed very faulty, but it will be stated accurately as now entertained. In speaking of the idea or conception of the Earth as a globe, means the time in history when man is thought first to have come to the conclusion that the Earth was spherical or of globular shape. This history scientifically dates back to the time of the Greeks, being a matter of 2,500 years. For ages previous to that vast age of 2,005 years ago, our scientists today hold that earlier ideas believed the Earth to be flat. It is in the modern impression, but invalid. It has been conceded that two Greeks, by names of Thales, pronounced Thales, living in the 6th and 7th century BC, and Pythagoras, BC 582-507, were the fathers and conceivers of the Earth's spherical shape. The idea that Columbus, as millions have still unwittingly believed, having been the spherical conceiver, is fallacious. For that reason, he does not enter this account. It is of course only in elementary schools, and in the minds of the scholars of the older schools, that this misconception still persists. It is no longer tenable in higher learning. After we leave the age of Thales and Pythagoras, as well as many other intervening generations of scholars, we come down a few centuries to the days of Aristotle and Euclid and others who conveyed the spherical idea on down to the 2nd century after the Christian era, in which lived Ptolemy, who created the Ptolemaic system, the geocentric system, i.e. geo, earth, centric, centre of the earth, and a centre of the universe. The Ptolemaic system then held way from the time on down till the conceptions by Copernicus, being a cursive matter of 1,400 years, that is to say 1,800 years ago, Copernicus having lived about 400 years ago. Copernicus, having now entered the field, decided that Ptolemy was wrong in holding that the Earth was the centre of the universe. He therefore rearranged the planets so that our Earth now assumes the mere position of a solar planet, that is, one of the planets that revolve around the Sun. This system is now under the technical name heliocentrism, i.e. helio, the Sun, centric, centre, the Sun at the centre of the system of planets, but not of the entire universe. Still, if modern astronomy were tenable, it would be the centre. There's a picture here of the Ptolemaic geocentric Earth. There we go. Centre of the universe. Because the stars do apparently form a circle around the Sun and thus the Earth. Still, astronomers, even though alleging that we are able to see the light of stars many thousands of years extinguished, yet they hold that there is a limit to telescopic power. At the present writing, our largest telescopes agree that there is a void beyond the furthest stars. This limit forms a circle around the Earth and the solar planets. If then the telescope does actually take in all the furthest stars, say 5 quintillions of miles away, they then would be centered around the Earth. Under the Ptolemaic system, the Earth was stationary, the stars, sun, moon, heavens all revolving around our sphere. Under the Copernican hypotheses, the Earth must be in motion. Consequently, there are many motion theories which are rampant. Some of the present motions are therefore the rotary motion of the Earth round an imaginary axis which gives our days and nights. This motion is about 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, while nearly nil and stationary at both poles. It is a revolution in an orbit of 185 million miles around the Sun. Hence it picks up a speed of 65,000 miles per hour. It is a gravitational motion and also a solar motion. The solar motion means the Sun is in motion, which consequently means that it is carrying its retinue of planets along with it. This motion is towards the constellation Lyra. The motion towards this motile star is fixed at 39,000 miles per hour. Dr. Drayton C. Miller holds that the solar motion is in excess of 450,000 miles an hour. The Copernican system, as stated above, is the theory entertained today as the true one. Aside from insurmountable barriers entailed by the excessive motions which we must affix to our system, in the theory entertained by Ptolemaic school, there is little else to differentiate the two systems. Of course, the motions and other consequential changes are sufficient to distinguish the one from the other, but the point that is made is namely that they both held that the Earth is a globe, which is the evidence we are now interested in. Ptolemy is somehow or another, which is no longer known, kept this 6 sextillion-ton Earth buoyantly floating in space. Under the rearrangement by Copernicus, the theory then demanded a gravitational item to keep it buoyant and aligned with the millions of other stars, Earth, suns, etc. Newton therefore found the time ripe to fit up his theory, yet the fact of the matter is that the theory of gravitation had already been adopted 900 years before Newton's time by an Arabian by name Musa ben Shaka. While it was also known to Julius Caesar many generations and ages before his time, Galileo also contributed more to the theory, one way or another, than did Newton himself. From this it may be seen that many otherwise well-taught persons stand oppressed with constant fear of their precepts being challenged without a moment's notice. Taught history thus is far from perfect. As further pertains to the theory of gravitation, myriads of attempts have been made to isolate this gravitational item. Still it maintains an elusiveness, proving its non-existence. Now, the idea of the Earth as a globe may be seen to extend back only to the Greeks' time of 2,500 years ago. This is certainly quite an expanse of time. From 2,500 years ago on backwards to the dawn of history of 7,000 years ago, apparently leaves a void of 4,500 years, during which 45 centuries we believe that the ancients thought the Earth was flat. As has been stated at the forepart of this historical clause, the history of the globular Earth is very inaccurate due to being incomplete. We will make an attempt to depict how and why this is so. That science, as well as pedagogic education, can and has been on the wrong track, and this in more ways than one has been demonstrated many times. Education of today is far from complete, for many are unaware of this. If some are familiar with those things, certainly science should have long since thrown off the cloak of tradition as shrouding it and made efforts to get at the facts. But our educators and textbook writers are still trailing along in their slipshod methods in worn-out shoes of their forebears who had not the opportunity of reviving as we since have had. It is unquestionably true that there has been enough talk going the rounds that we have progressed in our educational environment, but this is mere salesmanship talk. It fails to abide the facts which are evidenced by the numerous statements issued by sincere educators. Hence, where there is so much smoke, everyone then ought to be able to see the fire, even though one be outside the cryptic circle. It is of course but a very small matter to talk. To prove claims of progressive education, that is another point. The criminal can claim he is as honest as a saint, but when we find in his possession that which belongs to another, we are certainly not gullible enough to take his word. that someone must shove the goods unto him. The simile is the exact counterpart of similar idle claims. Now, it may be the most innocent personification of simplicity which prompts our age of educators to hold that we alone have advanced in such an excelling manner. But if honest of heart, they are far from reality. They therefore just owe it to themselves and our age to unbend just a wee bit. Fact is, a man does not know what he does not know. He knows only what he knows. That is clear, isn't it? But, like the ignorant man, they pretend to know what they do not know, so the public is no wiser. Mr. Clarence Darrow very ably empathized this state of mind when he said, "The fellow that knows the least is surest of what he does not know." And Professor Lee Rond McVeigh, president of University of Kentucky, brought this point home vividly when he addressed the graduating class at Western Reserve University during its 101st commencement exercise, which he said in part, "Is education wise enough and far-seeing enough? Can it bring to youth the progress of the day so that it will not be overcome in the confusion of knowledge?" There is some evidence that this is likely to be true, as shown in the offer to endow science, but there is always the drawing back of the old teaching and the difficulties of breaking traditions. Can the people of the nations recognize the importance of learning? If this cannot be done, then science will overcome men. The traditional nature of our institutions of learning is aptly described by Professor McVeigh's well-coached words. The instructor is loath to give up to modern study the years he has already spent in mastering traditional education. Still, there are also those who would be delighted if they could introduce the finds of modern research into present textbooks. These are the sincere minds within the environ who keep posted on current scientific events. Still, as stated, educational pseudo-scientists are nevertheless human, and according to the rule of variable-mindedness of humans, there are those who insinuously wend their way into school curriculum. Therefore, there are the drones and workers in science and education, just as we have drones, criminals, tramps in every walk of life, and sadly, as is anon the rule, such drones predominate. Educational institutions are therefore plodding along in their ancient cut and dried pedagogic uncouth methods of teaching. It would defy the perseverance of Chrono to pry them loose from their methods or impress upon them valid facts proving non-advancement. In view of the fixed, rigid, impregnable state of our institutions of learning, it is not at all surprising that its offspring, the present age, should imply themselves the crowning kings of all ages. Under a continuance of present state of things, we can rest assured that when the coffin lid is closed down over our eyes, that we will know as little of life as we knew it when we were just sweet little things. We will be ignorant at the end as we were in the beginning. The shroud of pedantry hides the only quality for which science has value in our life. It enshrouds truth. From the foregoing, which must nevertheless be painfully stated, having been experienced by the writer, it does not surprise us that scientists and education is still applying century-old ideas and methods. It is similarly not difficult to understand why millions of our otherwise literate constituents still cling to the misconception that Columbus discovered the spherical conception and other attributes accorded him. Now, the knowledge we have of the Greeks seems to have been lost and again found. It therefore comes down to us as a matter of only about a century ago. Before that time, everyone, every age, thought that Columbus was the globular daddy. And for that reason, the idea still persists, even among certain well-educated scholars. Especially is this true of our normal school teachers. Of course, before 100 years ago, there were many researchful students who knew that the Greeks really were an enlightened age of philosophical men. But these few researchful ones even then found pedagogic learning enmeshed, and thus ages elapsed before finally the Greek teaching superseded the Columbian form of dogmatism. Finally, though, the idea won importance, and from thence on continued investigations along this line have produced a great array of formerly unknown facts. The real sincere students who introduced the Grecian knowledge over the ads of the impregnable Columbianites died off, and then arose a new generation, many generations of students. As the Columbian organization had its immutable advocates, so the latter organization had its Greek advocates, who, similarly, being taught students and not researchful ones, clung to Greek. Hence today our catechism of resonance in learning is fundamentally Greek, from which there can be no modernistic departure. That Greek predominates in our schools needs no restatement. Right, that's the end of chapter 1 of Mechanical Proof the Earth is not a globe. I hope you enjoyed. Chapter 2 will come soon. Look out for it. Be in peace.